It is April 21st, 2025. At 7:35 a.m. in the morning, Pope Francis dies suddenly. For 3 days, thousands of people silently file past his body, lying in state inside St. Peter's Basilica at the heart of the Vatican. This solemn farewell, offered by the faithful, is made possible by a little-known ritual, thanatopraxy. It's a scientific procedure, the only thing that keeps the Pope's body from decomposing in front of the faithful. The Italian newspaper, Libero, explains that
thanatopraxy is the post-mortem treatment used to temporarily preserve the body. It's carried out after the death of every pope.
thanatopraxy matters because something terrible has happened before.
Thanatopraxy techniques have been refined and improved over the years, mainly to prevent a repeat of the disastrous handling of Pope Pius XII's body in 1958, when improper preservation caused it to decompose rapidly while still on public display before the faithful.
Rome, October 1958. Pope Pius XII has just died. He was the Pope of the Second World War, one of the 7 titans of good and evil, along with Churchill, Hirohito, Hitler, Mussolini, Roosevelt, and Stalin. They faced off in the greatest war mankind has ever known. The Pope's body, poorly embalmed, begins to swell, and then it bursts open in front of thousands of people. The blame lies with a completely absurd thanatopraxy technique. They wrapped him in cellophane with herbs, like a chicken in foil, because even the body of Jesus Christ had been preserved inside a shroud.
From the Gospel according to John, 1940. They took the body of Jesus and bound it with burial cloths along with the spices, according to the Jewish burial custom.
Who was responsible for this horrifying scene? An ophthalmologist, Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, appointed personal physician to Pope Pius XII. He didn't just employ ineffective thanatopraxy methods. According to reports, he also sold photographs of the dying pontiff and helped spread false news of the Pope's death before it had even happened. But Galeazzi-Lisi was much more than the incompetent doctor history remembers. A gambler, entangled in scandals, even linked to one of the most mysterious cold cases in Italian history, the death of Wilma Montesi. And yet, he stayed by Pius XII's side for 30 uninterrupted years as his trusted physician. How did this man manage to stay so long in the shadow of one of the most powerful and controversial popes in history? Why didn't Pius XII dismiss him sooner? These are unsettling questions. And to find an answer, I spent years investigating Riccardo. He was a doctor, a fraud, a man caught up in magic, pseudoscience, scandals, and unsolved crimes. This is the untold story of Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, a mystery buried within the walls of the Vatican, where faith, science, and superstition collide. And today, at last, you're ready to hear it.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam.
This story begins on March 3rd, 1939.
Eminentissimum, ac reverendissimum Dominum, Eugenium.
In Rome, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli becomes Pope Pius XII.
Ecclesiae Cardinalem Pacelli.
He is a fascinating and controversial figure, a brilliant diplomat, an expert in canon law, raised in an ultra-conservative Catholic family, destined from birth to rise through the Church with almost supernatural speed. Strange events surrounded Eugenio from the day he was born on March 2nd, 1876. 2 days after his birth, his father Filippo hurried to have him baptized. His mother was still in bed, exhausted, but he refused to wait. The baptism took place at the Church of Saints Celso and Giuliano. Right after the ceremony, an old priest named Don Jacobacci, nothing more than a guest, stepped out from the crowd. He took the child in his arms, lifted him high, and cried out a prophecy, just as Simeon had done with the infant Jesus in the temple.
63 years from now, Eugenio will become Pope.
It sounded unbelievable, and it was. The story was made up by a journalist 63 years after the baptism for a pamphlet celebrating Pacelli's election as Pope. And yet, stories like this are what help build the aura of legend around his life, even from day one. From the age of 3, Eugenio would dress up as a priest and pretend to say Mass. As a teenager, his parents enrolled him in a public high school, secular, and, as he would later recall, full of
anti-clerical types and Freemasons.
The school was Visconti, still one of the fanciest in Rome today. It didn't take long to see it wouldn't be a happy experience. At Visconti, Eugenio wrote an essay titled My Portrait, the first and only time in his life he ever tried to describe himself.
It is evident that my stature is remarkable neither for its height nor its shortness. From this, one may easily infer that, physically, I am a youth of middling appearance. The study of the Latin tongue affords me the greatest delight. My character is rather impatient and prone to outbursts. Yet I feel it my duty, through proper education, to restrain such tendencies. My only consolation lies in the instinctive generosity I know resides in my heart. Just as I cannot abide contradiction, so too am I quick to forgive those who offend me. In any case, I trust that age and reflection will suffice to erase those harmful defects which I readily acknowledge in myself.
If a boy today wrote like that, it would be taken as a sure sign of demonic possession. But back in 1889, that kind of language was probably just standard fare for students at the Visconti. Still, the fact that Pacelli could not abide contradictions is hard to overlook, especially for someone who would go on to lead the Catholic Church through some of the most contradictory decades of the 20th century. The years of the Second World War and the early Cold War. A graphologist, Evie Crotty, studied Eugenio's handwriting and concluded that he had
a personality marked by absolute control over aggressive impulses, deliberately held back at the cost of somatization.
Eugenio became a priest at 23, then a jurist, and finally a Vatican diplomat. A brilliant and bookish young man, he was destined for high office. And in the 1920s, he was posted to Germany as the Vatican's most influential envoy. He negotiated agreements between the Church and the German states to protect Catholics from the rising threats of political extremism, both right and left, that were tearing the country apart. But as he negotiated, National Socialism rose from the darkness of hell. Adolf Hitler came to power. The country descended into chaos. In 1933, Pacelli, by then Secretary of State under Pius XI, signed an agreement between the Church and Hitler's Reich. A pact that would later prove nearly impossible to defend, and which many would come to see as a tragic mistake. But not back then, when it seemed the only way to safeguard German Catholics from the regime's growing brutality. Eugenio was the embodiment of realpolitik, the art of what's possible, not of chasing ideals. So when, in 1939, the cardinals gathered to elect the new pope, they chose him. Eugenio Pacelli became Pius XII.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum. Habemus papam.
In 1 week, Nazi troops will crush Czechoslovakia. They will arrest, torture, and exterminate anyone who dares oppose their rule there. Nearly 500 Czech and Slovak Jesuit priests will be sent to concentration camps. Soon, in those regions, exhausted priests will be seen hauling carts, driven by young boys in Nazi uniforms, whip in hand. Within 6 months, the world will be at war. But today, in St. Peter's Square, Eugenio Pacelli becomes Pope Pius XII. He becomes the moral leader of Catholicism at the most immoral moment in human history. A car pulls up in front of a small villa on the Janiculum Hill, one of the most beautiful and romantic viewpoints in Rome. From here, you can see the dome of St. Peter's rising through the haze. A doctor steps out. History never recorded his name. He had been urgently summoned by Cardinal Marmaggi.
Buonasera. Please, come in.
Marmaggi speaks in a thick Roman dialect. The doctor walks in. The sitting room is warm and quiet. A fire crackles in the hearth. The two men take their seats.
And just who is this Galeazzi-Lisi supposed to be?
The question is direct and unsettling. Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi, a little-known ophthalmologist who, without any official appointment, has already positioned himself next to the new Pope, Pius XII. No one in the Vatican really knows who he is. But from the day of the election, he has been coming and going from the papal apartment as if he belonged there. The doctor knows that Cardinal Marmaggi is head of the Sacred Congregation of the Council, one of the most powerful men in the Vatican. He is effectively the Holy See's Minister of the Interior, the first line of defense against anything that might threaten the Vatican. What the doctor doesn't know, however, is just how many threats Cardinal Marmaggi is trying to contain, and how immense they are. The Vatican is already crawling with spies. At least 4 international intelligence services, all rivals, have infiltrated the Holy See. They are spying on the newly elected Pope Pius XII, his aides, and the Secretariat of State. Hitler's intelligence service has already cracked the Pope's diplomatic codes. Every religious institution in Rome is infested with informants, agents, and professional killers. And the Cardinal's question makes it clear why the doctor is here. In the middle of that snake pit, the mysterious Dr. Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi has quietly inserted himself. It's time to find out who he really is.
Galeazzi-Lisi runs an eye clinic in Rome on Via Sistina.
The doctor tells his story.
He's already been reprimanded by the Medical Association for false advertising, sensational claims, and bogus miracle cures. But he has powerful protectors. An influential half-brother, and a natural gift for deception.
The doctor accuses. He gossips. He exaggerates. He gives Cardinal Marmaggi everything he can to discredit Galeazzi-Lisi. But he doesn't know that his words won't be enough. A few days later, despite the concerns raised, Galeazzi-Lisi is officially and formally appointed Archiator, personal physician to Pope Pius XII. Not even Marmaggi, with all his power, can stop it. So, who is he? Who is Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi? And if he really is a charlatan, how did he ever manage to win the Pope's trust? How did two seemingly opposite lives become so closely bound together? To understand how that happened, we have to go back to the very beginning. It's July 26, 1891, 3 o'clock in the morning, what Italians call the devil's hour. 60 minutes during which everything feels upside down. Because on the clock, 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. are the same, just opposite in meaning. 3 in the afternoon is the hour of mercy, when Jesus shed his blood to save mankind. Satan, known as the monkey of Christ, is said to be the twisted parody of Jesus, opposite in every way, even in time. They say that if you wake up at 3 in the morning, you should cross yourself to keep the demons away. Exactly 10 minutes after that cursed hour struck, at 3:10 in the morning, our protagonist is born in Rome. Riccardo Arturo Domenico Filippo Maria Galeazzi. He isn't Galeazzi-Lisi yet, just Galeazzi. Riccardo is a bright, sociable child who loves to study. But something terrible scars his childhood. The sudden death of his older sister, Virginia, on December 17, 1900. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the hour of mercy, the perfect counterpoint to the hour he was born. With her body still in the house, in those days, Riccardo's vision collapses. The child goes temporarily blind. 18 years from now, in Vienna, a neurologist named Sigmund Freud will revisit an old horror story. In it, a cruel mother warns her children that if they don't fall asleep, the Sandman will come and tear their eyes out. Freud will suggest that the fear of going blind, so common in children, is often extreme because it stirs something deeper, an ancient fear buried in us since the beginning of time. The fear of being castrated by someone or by something. But that's all still to come. Right now, in the early 1900s, no one's even imagining a link, symbolic or not, between the eyes and the penis, between losing one, the other, and the terror of death. And yet, watching little Riccardo Galeazzi break down in the waiting room of a Roman eye doctor, where his mother has brought him in a panic, a very sensitive person might already suspect something. And yet, in the midst of Riccardo's despair, the eye doctor stays calm, gentle, almost paternal. He treats the boy, and in that quiet act, he opens a door. Something shifts, something begins. It's here that Riccardo feels the first stirrings of a desire to give light back to others. This is the moment he begins to see himself, one day, as an eye doctor. World War I breaks out. Riccardo, fresh from medical school, is deployed to the front as an officer in the Italian army. Nothing could prepare him for what he's about to see. The horrors he witnesses in the Alps will stay with him forever. Summary executions, mutilated corpses, soldiers burned alive or slowly consumed by infection. Every day, the young doctor stares death in the face. It's on Monte Grappa, across the rocky slopes of the Carso, and along the banks of the Piave, that Riccardo's idealism dies. When he returns to Rome, he's not the same man. The war is still inside him. Maybe that's why he keeps chasing danger, searching for adrenaline wherever he can find it. Race cars, poker. These are the obsessions that take hold of Riccardo when he returns from the war. At the wheel, he feels free, as if speed could shake off the ghosts still chasing him. He drives hard, races under the name Mohammed, flirts with death at every turn. He's also a respected eye doctor in Rome. But at the poker table, he throws down obscene amounts without blinking. Anyone who's been through war isn't afraid of anything. Maybe he doesn't feel anything at all. That cold blood helps him win and lose fortunes in a single night, buying and selling dream cars like the Maserati Tipo V4. It's early December, 1929. At the Grand Hotel Excelsior on Via Veneto, in the elegant heart of Rome, the usual stillness suddenly breaks. A flood of people pours through the doors. The newspaper Corriere Romano calls them, with inhuman detachment, a crowd of cripples, amputees, the paralyzed, the deaf. the hotel turns into a field hospital, just like the ones thrown together in the mud of the Great War. The sick push forward, crowding around the concierge. Everyone wants a glimpse of the Messiah. Word is, he's come from San Sebastian, Spain. They call him El Doctor Milagroso, the miracle doctor. His name is Fernando Asuero. The legend surrounding this man had exploded in just 7 months. Fernando Asuero, once an obscure Basque ear, nose, and throat specialist, had cured a young woman of incurable sciatica. Next, he treated a chauffeur. Word about him spread like wildfire. And now here he is, at the Hotel Excelsior in Rome, hailed by anyone in search of a miracle. Italy's most important newspaper, Corriere della Sera, writes about him, describing a throng of the God touch that follows him. There's a method. It's called Asuero-therapy. Asuero claims it can cure anything.
Recipe for Asuero therapy, as reconstructed from articles in Corriere della Sera. Ingredients: 1 nasal dilator, 1 alcohol lamp, 1 blunt-tipped probe with a platinum point. Instructions: insert the dilator into the patient's nose.
Meanwhile, heat the probe over the flame until it's red hot. Insert the instrument into the expanded nostril, first the right, then the left, tickling the mucous membranes. With your free hand, massage the patient's face until it becomes visibly flushed and their eyes start to water. Finally, give the probe a quick tap to reach the trigeminal nerve. Voila! The miracle is done.
A technique that, according to the Spanish healer Fernando Asuero, helps with sciatica and much more. Varicose veins, rheumatoid arthritis, pulmonary gangrene, hemorrhoids, Pott's disease. All illnesses, Asuero says, are nothing more than circulation disorders, and Asuero therapy can cure them.
It is the fundamental theoretical point. Now, it cannot be denied anymore. One fact is worth more than 100 theories. And our theory is based on 100,000 facts.
What does a Spanish healer on a brief visit to Rome have to do with Riccardo Galeazzi? We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's take his advice and go back to the facts. The facts are these. In the early days of Asuero therapy, before he had even set foot in Italy, El Doctor Milagroso had already seen thousands of patients in San Sebastian, in Spain. A crowd of 60,000 had cheered him as a savior on the feast of his namesake, Saint Fernando. In Argentina, the composer Manuel Colominas had dedicated a tongue-in-cheek tango to him. In Cuba, they had even honored him with the song El Paralítico, later made famous by Campe Segundo. He comes to Italy then. In Rome, the wave of his fame arrives ahead of him, fueled by major Italian newspapers such as Il Messaggero, Corriere della Sera, and a host of popular weeklies. Rich and poor, educated and illiterate, fascists and liberals. They all flock to the Excelsior, hoping for a cure. That's how an anonymous patient writes in a letter to Corriere della Sera dated December 12, 1929.
I have been suffering from a fierce case of sciatica for a month and a half, unresponsive to any form of treatment. As soon as Asuero arrived here, my wife took it upon herself to chase after the Spanish ambassador for half a day, just to obtain a letter of introduction. He received me at 8 o'clock in the evening, in his room at the Excelsior. No equipment whatsoever. Spread across the red tablecloth in the room, there were some 20 instruments, none of which looked particularly impressive. Not a basin, not a drop of disinfectant, not even a flame from an alcohol lamp. Beside him stood a young lady with heavily painted eyes, wearing no trace of a white coat. The moment I stepped in, he gave me a quick once-over. Since the note of introduction already mentioned my diagnosis, he said,
"Usted tiene una sciatica."
On that point, we were in agreement. He motioned for me to sit in an armchair and said,
"It's nothing. Guaranteed recovery. 5 minutes."
Then, having armed himself with a small flashlight, he widened my nostrils with an instrument without the slightest attempt at disinfecting it, and began to examine the inside. Once the inspection was done, he confirmed,
"Guarigione assicurata. Ningun dolor. Guaranteed recovery. No pain."
He then proceeded to shove 5 or 6 fine wires into my right nostril, moving them around inside. I had the distinct impression that he made no real effort to target any specific point. Everything seemed to do just as well as anything else. He repeated the same operation on the other nostril. At that point, he must have feared he had caused some bleeding, because he hastily asked the young lady for some cotton. But there was none. Looking around, she appeared rather flustered. Then she spotted a used wad of cotton on a chair, already shaped like a nostril, and handed it to the doctor, who promptly inserted it. I, of course, saw none of this. The position I was in, the pain, and my faith in the thaumaturge prevented me from making even the simplest observations. The operation concluded with a few slaps to my cheeks and some taps with a probe to my temples, chin, and shoulders. Once finished, he said,
"You may stand. The sciatica is gone. Usted puede ir esta noche a bailar. You can go dancing tonight."
And thus, I was cured. Except that, as I made my way down the stairs, I was already telling my wife that the only result of the visit was that I'd been relieved of 1,000 lire. That night confirmed it. It was one of the worst I'd ever spent. There you have it, a summary of my visit to Dr. Asuero.
We know that Asuero is welcomed to Rome and assisted by several Italian doctors. But is Riccardo Galeazzi among them? The answer may lie with another Italian doctor who enters the picture, Benedetto Vincenzini, known as the Asuero of Tuscany. Vincenzini is Italian through and through. He worked with Asuero back in the days of San Sebastian in Spain and introduced Asuero therapy to Italy even before his mentor arrived in Rome. The Italian version of Asuero therapy, introduced by Vincenzini, is known as nasal reflex sympathetic therapy, and
it involves a series of light cauterizations or electric stimulations applied repeatedly to targeted areas of the nasal mucosa.
That's how Vincenzini describes it in one of his promotional brochures.
The procedure is minor, bloodless, completely painless, and entirely safe, especially when the nasal lining is first numbed with a dose of cocaine.
Cocaine. There's no evidence that Don Fernando Asuero ever used it on his patients. But Vincenzini, the so-called Asuero of Tuscany, did, and that casts serious doubt on the so-called miraculous recoveries. On December 7, 1929, Vincenzini faces a disciplinary hearing before the Medical Association of Parma. He appears before the commission accompanied by 2 rather unexpected figures. They're the Galeazzi brothers. Riccardo, the ophthalmologist, and our protagonist, returns to the scene. Alongside him is his brother Giulio, a lawyer. We won't read about this story in the papers until 1958, when Riccardo Galeazzi-Lisi's name will appear alongside that of the Spanish quack Asuero and his Italian disciple, Vincenzini. But it's a strange tale, because when in 1929, The doctors in Parma, during Vincenzini's disciplinary hearing, ask, "What are these two doing here?" Both Galeazzi brothers step in to defend him. One as a lawyer, the other as a medical expert. Both get thrown out of the room. Riccardo will deny for the rest of his life ever having anything to do with Assuero. And yet, he was connected to Assuero's main Italian disciple, Benedetto Vincenzini. He defended Assuero therapy before the medical association. And even though we can't say for sure that Riccardo ever studied under Assuero or practiced his methods, perhaps this is exactly what the anonymous doctor will allude to when, in 1939, he will tell Cardinal Marmaggi that Riccardo already had the stench of quackery about him. Meanwhile, in 1929, chaos breaks out in Rome over the figure of the healer Fernando Assuero. Senator Alessandro Guasciaro, speaking on behalf of the fascist medical syndicate, even calls for the personal intervention of Benito Mussolini. In a formal motion, the senator writes,
"To determine whether it may be urgently necessary to halt the activities of the Spanish Dr. Assuero, who is illegally performing so-called miracle cures through unscientific endonasal procedures and suggestive hypnotic techniques."
Sensing mounting pressure, Fernando Assuero flees south, eventually making his way to Argentina. But Mussolini is quick to respond. On December 13, 1929, he addresses the Senate directly. His remarks spark laughter throughout the chamber.
Dr. Assuero says that he has the panacea to cure all ills. Therefore, we are in a sphere different from that of the medical professions. We are in the sphere of miracles. Now, to perform miracles, three are needed: the miracle worker and, above all, the one who believes in the miracle. In any case, it does not appear so far that Assuero's treatments have caused any harm, except financial, to people.
Mussolini sheds light on a small mystery. How does someone like Assuero even get into Italy? Into fascist Italy, a totalitarian state where the professions are under strict control. How is he able to practice his craft? Why didn't the fascist secret police stop him sooner? How does it get to the point where a hotel in the center of Rome overflows with desperate crowds clinging to the hope of a miracle? Well, Mussolini explains that Assuero had been allowed to operate in Italy under a
special case.
So, what was this special case? Assuero had been cleared to treat a single patient, someone shrouded in mystery, but clearly influential. Then, Assuero pushed the boundaries. What began as a one-off consultation quickly spiraled into something far more ambitious. He started treating multiple people at the hotel on Via Veneto. Assuero's Italian chapter, involving his disciple Vincenzini and his friend Riccardo Galeazzi, comes to an end. El Dr. Milagroso flees to Argentina. But even there, the authorities turn their backs on him. By 1931, Assuero therapy is officially banned there. El Hombre Místico dies in his hometown of San Sebastián at just 55. But the mystery surrounding him never truly disappears. As recently as 2015, a neurologist writing in the journal Neurosciences and History proposes a new theory.
The results of Dr. Assuero suggest that hysteria was a common disorder during the first third of the 20th century in Spain and represent an interesting historical example of the placebo effect.
Even Mussolini, in his own way, saw the core of it. It's a theme that will weave in and out of this story as we explore the lives of Riccardo Galeazzi and his friend Eugenio Pacelli. The deeper truth is this: it's the patient's belief that makes the miracle happen.
To perform miracles, three are needed: the miracle worker and, above all, the one who believes in the miracle.
With Asuero-therapy, it wasn't just the crowds at the Excelsior who were convinced. One high-ranking church official believed as well. Years later, the Italian newspaper, Corriere della Sera, would report,
"Rumor had it he came to us at the invitation of a prominent church authority who had been suffering from a stubborn and troublesome illness. Swiftly cured thanks to the therapeutic sorcery of the aforementioned doctor."
Who was this prominent church authority? Let's hazard a guess. Perhaps Eugenio Pacelli, later known as Pius XII, who was plagued throughout his life by chronic hiccups, a condition that could easily be described as a stubborn and troublesome illness. We'll never know for sure. One thing, however, is certain. After the bizarre encounter with the quack Asuero, Riccardo Galeazzi's path edges dangerously close to the corridors of the Vatican. Because in Vatican City, if you know how to tell the right story, hope can be turned into power. And Riccardo Galeazzi, a man who has already faced both the devil's hour and the hour of mercy, knows all too well that in the Vatican, you can pass from one to the other in an instant. In the next episode, we'll dive into the heart of the mystery. How Riccardo Galeazzi, Mohammed, the doctor with a shadowy past, a gambler, and confidant of controversial healers, would go on to become the Pope's personal physician, and what secrets, rivalries, and power plays would begin to fester behind that extraordinary appointment.
You've just listened to the first episode of Riccardo, the Man Who Blew Up the Pope, a podcast by Rob Ferraro. Associate producer, Vittoria Ursi.